creative journey. It's easy to get lost, but don't worry, you'll lift off. Sometimes you just need a creative pep talk.
Hey, you're listening to the Creative Pep Talk podcast. I'm your host, Andy J. Pizza. There are few Pandora's boxes for the creative like that question, what do you want? What are your goals? I feel like Ryan Gosling asking Rachel McAdams, what do you want?
It's not that simple.
What do you want?
Like, that's how I feel when I'm asking myself, what are your goals? That's from The Notebook. I don't know if I mentioned that. Your imagination and your insecurities just start running wild if you're anything like me. When you start thinking, what do I want? What are my goals? Because all of a sudden you're distracted by the 35 of your childhood dreams that you've achieved 0.3% of. And the idea of like opening up yourself to wanting anything ever again just feels like opening yourself up to another heartbreak. Dang you, Ryan Gosling. But maybe there's a way to approach this question in the opposite way. Rather than asking yourself what you want, maybe you could ask the opposite and find some insight that might actually give you some firmer, more actionable results that could open up a brighter, more inspiring creative future for you, even if it's just a little bit brighter. In this episode, we're going to do just that. But first, a little word from our sponsors. There's nothing better than getting better. Accomplishing growth is extremely satisfying, and online classes from Skillshare make it possible. Learn about illustration, design, photography, productivity, and marketing with Skillshare's short classes. You can move your creative journey forward without putting your life on hold. Later in the episode, I'm going to tell you about a class called Creative Transformation, 9 exercises to draw, write, and discover your future with Mari Andrew. But before we get to all of that, you can go get a free trial of Skillshare right now at Skillshare.com/creativepep. This episode is supported by Wireframe, which is an original podcast by Adobe. This show is for small business owners who handle all their own branding, content, and design, maybe just like you, for their own business. So each episode features one small business owner, and they pair them with a mentor who has built their own successful brand, and then a designer to help them execute a plan to solve that problem. In the middle of this episode, I'm going to share a specific episode that's relevant to the kind of stuff we're talking about today that really caught my attention. But until we get to that, you can search Wireframe in your podcast player and find it wherever you listen to podcasts. And we'll also include a link in the show notes of this episode. Thank you to Wireframe for their support. This is episode 1 of our Creative Pathfinder series. This is a 3-part series about how to know what to make today to unlock the opportunities that you're perfect for tomorrow. Essentially, what personal work can I make before anybody asks me to that will help me get the professional work that I'm after? This series is designed to help you in your creative path. How do you find your creative path? AKA, how do you make some of the most difficult choices as a creator that there are to make? AKA, what should I make? Which path should I take next? And how do I actually get there where I'm trying to go? This series is a new adaptation of our Creative Career Path framework. You can get a free copy of our Creative Career Path e-handbook by signing up to our newsletter at creativepeptalk.com/path. And you can work through that as we go through these 3 episodes in the next following weeks. The 3 episodes in this series are a lot like 3 acts in a story. Act 1, the creative call to adventure, aka defining what you want. This is kind of the goal setting section of the series. Act 2, the creative journey, aka living your creative montage by building your own personal project. This is where you get busy, and the people watching or fast forwarding, they don't want to see all the messy middle, okay? But that's the part where it really gets juicy and where you really have to do your best work. This is where you do the work of making the project that helps you move towards what you want. This is the making section of your path. Act 3, the final act, is slaying your creative dragon, aka going for the work that you want head on, armed with the creative work that you did in Act 2. This is the marketing section of your creative journey. Are you ready for it? Let's go. Chapter 1, say yes to the call. The first step to getting what you want in your creative practice is actually knowing what you want. Not only is this very tricky for most creators that I know, myself included, because, we have so many interests and so many passions and so many creative ideas of where the future could go, and it's just all very hard to make any choices on. We're better at coming up with the choices than we are picking the choices. That's just what it's like to have that kind of creative divergent mind. But it's also just a very vulnerable place to put yourself. Like, allowing yourself to want something opens up the potential for not getting it, the potential for breaking your own heart by allowing yourself to even want anything at all. And that makes sense. Like, just think about it. Any hero that gets called to adventure is often reluctant to go after it, and initially usually refuses the call. That's where there's a whole section about refusing the call in story structure in the hero's journey, because if you allow yourself to really go for something, you are risking not getting it. And it often just feels safer to stay home and not try at all. There's this idea of like non-attachment to the goals, but there's a difference between, never even playing the game and just taking your ball and going home and never wanting to win, and just learning how to enjoy the game. You know what I mean? And part of enjoying the game is really going for it, trying to win. And if you lose, you're like, hey, I still had a good time playing and trying and fighting for the thing. I think that attachment to we have to win or I'm not playing at all, that's where you go wrong. But it's actually great to want something and go after something with all of your heart and spirit and creativity. But if you are feeling apathetic and stuck and you can't you can't really blame anybody if you're not willing to go out there and give it a shot. If you're just stuck exactly where you are right now, but you're not really doing anything about it, you can't blame anybody else if you're not willing to try. So how do you try? How do you go after something new? How do you open up your heart again and risk that heartbreak? The 3 steps to unlocking the work you're perfect for, the opportunities you really want, in my opinion, they mirror most stories that you've ever been told. So step 1, as in Act 1 of a story, is where the hero, aka you, there's a lot of AKAs in this episode, I'm realizing, you need to determine what you want. Harry Potter wants to defeat Voldemort. Moana wants to restore the heart of Te Fiti. Luke Skywalker wants to bring balance to the Force. To be a hero, to achieve something great, to have a life that is worth sinking your teeth into and getting excited for and get out of bed for, you got to know, what the heck am I doing here? What do I want? And you got to have crystal clarity that focuses that momentum. Because every time there's a lull, you can't be like, what was it that I can't even remember why I cared in the first place. You ever feel like that? And I didn't invent this. Comparative myth scholar Joseph Campbell, who popularized the hero's journey story structure, he didn't invent this either. And he'd be the first to admit it. He found that pattern in storytelling, this pattern of a character that wants something in every single culture in the world that he studied. In every story that we told, there is a character that wants something. And it's not because it goes back to this one ancient storyteller, like the first person who predated Aesop, who really just cracked the code on what's a juicy story. No, nobody invented this framework. This is how our brains work. We started telling stories like that because our brains were like, yes, that's exactly how I get motivated. That's exactly what's interesting and makes me lean into life. We didn't invent story. Story was within us with all of its parts. And I'm convinced it's more that over time, we just discovered this pattern within our own minds. And in that way, story is the code of how our brains work and the fuel that keeps them going. And so if you're stuck and you're apathetic and you're not interested and you're struggling to get out of bed, it may be that you don't have a clear desire. And I'm not the first to say this. Joseph Campbell, Dr. Gene Houston, Nancy Duarte, Donald Miller. Donald Miller just wrote a whole book about this very topic called Hero on a Mission. That's a really great way to frame this. And there's countless writers and thinkers and storytellers of all kinds have said this long before I could. There's a whole series of journals called the Hero's Journal. And it's all about framing your life as an epic journey. And it's not because we get motivated by stories, but stories were motivated by us. They came from us. And so what is unique about this podcast series versus all of those other places you could go find is how to apply that motivating power to your creative practice in a very practical way that you won't find in any of those places. And it will give you the ability to strategically unlock the opportunities that you're after and unlock your own motivation. So if you're feeling aimless and unmotivated, story would say it's because you don't know what you want. You don't know what you're after. You don't know, why am I getting out of bed? You're like an actor in the story being like, what's my motivation? I just don't know. Why am I doing any of this stuff? Why am I trying to pay my bills? Why am I trying to feed myself and stay on this planet? I need a motivation. I need to know, what am I here doing in this season of my life, in this act of my story? If story is the pattern of our brain, it says we don't pay attention or perk up until we know there's a character who wants something. That's how we know a new story has begun. Maybe you need a new story. Maybe you need to want something new again. When you know what you want, you will start a new story. You'll lean into life and you'll have a clear image of what you're after. That's when things get interesting. The adventure starts when we find that call to adventure and go after this fresh, new desire. In this episode, we're going to talk about how to define what your next creative call to adventure is going to be. Let's do it. This is how you actually figure out, or at least some ideas on how to narrow down what you're going to go after and what you're going to focus on next.